Welcome to the Top Talent and Immigration Show with your host, Kaushik Ranchod. In this show, we discuss how companies and top talent in America overcome immigration obstacles and help create freedom and prosperity in America.
Kaushik Ranchod here. I'm the founder of Top Talent and Immigration, where I talk with leading researchers, business leaders, and attorneys on how they overcome big challenges in the immigration process and business. And today we have John Milikowsky, who's the founder and senior attorney at Milikowsky Tax Law. So he's going to be advising us or discussing with us about different tax issues and how that's related to businesses who are hiring employees or immigrants as well. And it's going to be very interesting. So I'm very excited. And before founding his practice, John was a manager and owner of several small businesses for 20 years. And he's been in the small businessman's shoes. So John is also passionate about advocacy for business owners as they navigate IRS audits and EDD investigations. And he is especially proud of his work with clients, including his tax proposal to IRS, U.S. Treasury, and Congressional Subcommittee, and being named in the top 3 San Diego tax attorneys by the Union Tribune. He's also a loving husband and proud father of 3 girls and plays a mean duet on the piano. Welcome, John.
Hi, thank you.
All right, and today's episode is brought to you by Ranchod Law Group. Ranchod Law Group's mission is to provide freedom and prosperity for immigrants and help more businesses to connect to top talent. Ranchod Law Group believes that immigrants add tremendous value to the U.S. economy and helps companies facing a shortage of talent to make up that gap and grow, thanks to the immigrant talent that contribute to their bottom line. They also help immigrants to navigate the complicated immigration process today. Ranchod Law Group has been in business for nearly 20 years in Northern California and serves clients nationwide as a trusted advisor for employers and helping employers to attract talented immigrant employees. Contact Ranchod Law Group today for details on how the firm can help you to solve your immigration challenges. Visit us at ranchodlaw.com or 916-613-3553. So, John, we are very excited to have you. One of the hot topics is coming up with a lot of our clients that comes up from time to time is what happens if you have a bank account that's outside of the United States and you immigrate to the United States?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the best thing that anybody could do is really to plan before they move to the U.S. To determine, well, what income are they going to plan to report after they move. And that income might be connected with a foreign bank account. So once you are a U.S. citizen or a U.S. person, so you have either a citizenship or maybe a green card, or you're physically present in the country for more than 183 days in the last 3 years, then you are subject to worldwide tax on your income and have to report that to the United States. But most importantly, on your tax return, you have to identify whether you have a foreign bank account. And that foreign bank account, if it has more than $10,000 in aggregate amongst all of your accounts, and it doesn't necessarily have to be just a bank account, actually. It could be any type of financial account, sometimes even retirement accounts. But if you, even one client we had a very unusual circumstance, they had $5 million of gold bars in a safe deposit box in Switzerland. And that was subject to reporting. And the interesting thing is IRS even had an FAQ on that. If you have gold bars, you have to report those. So they're really looking for liquid funds. But if you have some liquid funds and you're either listed on the account as a signer or somebody is holding it on your behalf and you're just basically a beneficial owner, but you're not listed anywhere, you would still have to report that to the U.S. government if it's in excess of $10,000. What the government's trying to do is trying to find people, or at least, trying to find people that are not reporting income to the United States. So they figured, well, if you have a requirement to report bank accounts, then that would probably help identify people that probably should be paying more tax in the United States. And a lot of the banks actually have a requirement on their FATCA, F-A-T-C-A. It's a law that came into effect, I believe, in 2016. And it requires the banks who identify an account as having a person connected with the United States to turn those names over to the U.S. Treasury. So one way or the other, the U.S. government finds out about it. Eventually, they could audit the person. But the point in the end is if you have a foreign account when you move here and you have more than $10,000 for all the accounts, you're going to want to report that.
That's so interesting. And I want to ask this question for the listeners. They might be asking, well, you hear about these accounts in the Cayman Islands or Swiss bank accounts. What about those accounts?
Those are actually highly suspect accounts. A while ago, and I don't know if it occurs as much as it used to, but in the Cayman Islands, the way people used to get around having basically a paper trail for moving money back and forth is that they would put the money offshore, and then they would use a debit card to take the money out. So they would charge it like a normal credit card. They would charge transactions in the U.S., all over the world, and not report any of that income. And of course, the income, that is the assumption the income is coming from the account that generates interest. But if you earn the money and you didn't report the income and you put the money offshore, the Cayman Islands was a hot place to put it and to have a debit card attached to it. So you're just basically dwindling those funds down, and it was a lot harder to trace those funds. But the Cayman Islands, Isle of Man, Swiss bank accounts, which are really not private anymore, and there's a bunch of other places that were very popular destinations to park money.
And on a personal note, did you know you always wanted to be a tax attorney when you grew up, or what was your path to becoming a tax lawyer?
No, that's a great question. I didn't know that I wanted to get into tax when I was younger, and even after finishing law school. So you mentioned a little bit of my background. I have a lot of business experience. I've owned several different companies. I ran my parents' company. They had a retail store, a very large one. It was about 25,000 square foot, about 28 employees, a little under 10 million in sales, lots of products, a lot of containers coming from overseas, and it was a lot of fun. And one day we had a notice from the state of California Board of Equalization, and at the time the BOE had the obligation or responsibility for auditing companies for sales tax. And we had a sales tax audit, and I remember going through that process with our CPA, and I said, this is really a lot of fun. It's something that I enjoy doing. I enjoy working with numbers. I understand the process. I understand what's involved in our company and bringing the evidence forward to try to win the case. And I was already an attorney at that point. So I had done litigation for a good part of my legal career. Maybe, I've been an attorney for now 17 years. So at that point, I was a litigation attorney for 5 years, and then I ended up running my parents' company, took a couple of years off from the law practice. I worked for larger law firms, and then I ran the company. And then after that, I decided, wow, this is really exciting. So I went back to the LLM tax program, and this was at the recommendation of one of my mentors. He said, you really should go get an LLM in tax. I think you're going to enjoy it. And I had no idea. I really didn't. And I finished the LLM tax. I did really well. I actually wrote a speech for a sitting U.S. tax court judge, which I think he liked my speech. And then, finished, and then I had applied for a job at the IRS, and at the time they had a hiring freeze. They interviewed me and said, we definitely want to hire you. We just have to find a slot. Not wanting to wait too much longer after the crash of the stock market in 2008, because that's when I finished my LM. I ended up opening my law firm in 2009, and I enjoy every minute. I have to tell you, this is our 10th year anniversary. And every morning I wake up probably around 5:30 in the morning, and before I know it, I snap my fingers, and it's already 6 p.m. The whole day goes very quickly. But I love what I do. I love helping people, love helping business owners, and in the end, making it fair, basically keeping government in check, because they don't have all the information. And when they audit companies, if the business owner is not prepared, it could be some significant taxes owed. And our job is really to bridge the gap in knowledge and understanding of how the company works, and pairing that up with the law to show that in reality, the taxes really are not owed. So I love every moment of it.
I love that. And I love that you were a former business owner or part of other businesses, because really you understand what a business owner goes through. And that really is so important in helping people and advising people on their business concerns. And talking about businesses, how do you see the changes with the Trump administration affect businesses? What would be the best type of business entity to file for to take advantage of some of the tax benefits if someone is opening up a business or they're planning on trying to take advantage of those tax benefits?
So if we're just strictly looking generically, the S Corp is a really very favorable type of business entity. You get the 20% if you qualify. With certain industries, there are exemptions, limitations, but generally the S Corp, based on the new Trump tax laws, would give you a lower tax rate as a flow through. So because the company itself, the corporation on S Corp, does not pay taxes, it's all flowing through to the personal income tax return of the owner or the shareholders. But that generally is what is the favored business entity at this moment. But you really have to take a step back and look at what type of company you're in. So if you are a professional, you're an attorney, a contractor, construction contractor, you're not allowed to have an LLC because a professional license really cannot be, you can't operate a professional license within an LLC. There have been some recent changes in the state of California with construction contractors where they do allow that under certain circumstances. But the general rule is if you have a professional license, you really can't run it within an LLC. LLCs are great for real estate. It's limited liability. It's like the liability protection of a corporation, but taxed like a partnership. So, and between an LLC and an S Corp, which is basically a partnership and an S Corp, they're very similar. There are going to be some slight differences, and I think the S Corp might provide you with a little bit better tax advantage, but you should seek the advice of your CPA. And a great exercise, either mid-year or toward the end of the year, is to have your CPA or tax preparer run your tax return two different ways. Well, what if I ran it as an LLC? What would that look like to me? How much taxes would I owe on my individual income tax return? Now let's switch it up and put it as an S Corp. How much more or less would it be? So there's some really good things. One other the C Corp, one other type of entity, has a lot of advantages as well. Although you do pay double tax, right? So the corporation is going to be taxed on its net income. And then when the owner pulls out money as a distribution of dividend or as wages, that's the two ways that money can come out of a C Corp, they're paying a second level of tax. So it's not preferable from that perspective, but if you want an exit strategy in a short amount of time, within 5, 6, 7 years, the C Corp provides some very advantageous tax reductions. On the federal level, you may qualify for between the 75% and maybe even 100% exemption from federal income taxes. Now, there's some very strict requirements, certain industries, dollar amounts of assets. There's a lot of hurdles to hop through. But if you qualify, you can really reduce your federal income tax on the sale of your company. Still have to pay the state income tax for California, but the federal can be reduced substantially. And it could be anywhere between 50% all the way to 100% if you qualify. And I think the laws have obviously changed, and over the years, that number gets moved around. But definitely, if you're looking to start a company and you have a startup, you're looking to do a startup and you're thinking you're going to exit within 5 years, if you stay as a C Corp, because you have to make that election if you want to do it in year one. If you want to be an S, you would make the election. But if you're not going to make the election, you'd stay as a C. You might have some significant tax savings. You're going to be paying double tax along the way, but when you sell your company, there'll be a reduction. So those are the two main things: the LLCs and the corporations. On the LLC front, one additional point that's important: if you are a single member LLC, which means you're the only owner, then it becomes a disregarded entity because you can't have an LLC which is treated like a partnership. You can't have a partnership with one person. It requires two people. So then you can report that on your federal tax return. It would be on your personal return. It would just go under what they call Schedule C as a sole proprietor, which has some benefits as well. So there's a couple advantages and disadvantages, but it depends on the industry you're in, what your exit strategy looks like, whether you have investors or no investors. If you're looking to be a big startup corporation, you might be a C Corp and you might form your corporation in Delaware. So there's a lot of things that you can do, but it really depends on your industry and what your expectations are for the company.
So it really depends upon each person's unique situation, and it looks like you really have to plan well ahead of time. So what this comes into play, like if you're applying for an investor visa, starting up a business, really you should consult with a tax attorney or someone who's knowledgeable in this area to make sure you have the right entity. And this also can apply to national interest waiver. If you're applying for national interest waiver, and this would be a very narrow area of the law, but you may be eligible to apply for national interest waiver and start a business. This would be another area where you really want to make sure you get your entity correct. And in the terms of an S corporation, John, how much would you say people are saving, like what percentage tax-wise by doing that versus, let's say, a sole proprietorship?
That's a tough question. As a sole proprietor, you're not allowed to take wages as a W-2 employee because your income from that is the net income of the company. Whereas an S corp, you're required, or C corp, any type of corporation, you're required to be on payroll. Any officer of the corp must be paid a reasonable compensation. So if the company makes net income, say it has $10 million of sales and $9 million of expenses, and there's $1 million left over, and if you take that $9 million, 100% of it as a distribution, the government will come back, the state and state will come back and say, hey, you should have been on payroll. So they'll adjust it so that they treat it as if you did pay yourself payroll, and they'll assess you payroll tax. So it's hard to say what the tax savings are, but the taxes should be, it might be a couple percentage points lower with an S corp than it would be with a sole proprietor. But you really, at the end of the day, you have to see how much profit. You can run it. You can run it both ways. You know, if at the end of the year, if you didn't form a corporation and say you're going to be a sole proprietor, you could have your tax preparer say, hey, let's run this as if I was an S corp. What would it look like? How much would I owe, more or less than taxes? You know, including payroll taxes that the company has to pay, as if I were, if I was being paid wages. So, and then if it comes out less as a S corp, then you might then consider forming an S corp in year two, and then moving forward that way. But if you haven't opened your business yet and you're planning to, and maybe you're planning to move to the United States, a corporation from a liability perspective is a great thing. Because if you're in a high risk business like construction or something like that, you want to have some liability protection, so that people can't get at your personal assets if you breach a contract or create some liability in your business. So there's a lot of things to consider.
What are some mistakes that you see small businesses or smaller sized businesses make in tax preparation, tax filing, or choosing the entity?
Yeah, so there's actually a lot of things that we see go wrong. So our law firm, Milikowsky Tax Law, is primarily involved in resolution of a dispute with the government. And that dispute comes in the form of an audit. So you file a tax return, and the government comes back and says, we disagree. Let's go through all your numbers. Let's go through your documents, and let's see where you're wrong. And that could be income tax. It could be payroll tax. It could be even hiring independent contractors. And the state of California comes back, and that's a big thing right now. They come back and say, those contractors should have been employees, and we're going to now assess you payroll tax on all the money you paid them. But some of the common mistakes made by business owners in general is failing to file 1099, either failing to file them all together or filing them late. And if you have more than 250, you have to file them electronically. So there's some interesting twists there. And they've been really enforcing that rule lately. I already mentioned the misclassification. California has recently changed the law on what is an independent contractor. They used to rely upon a 13-factor test, and you didn't have to have all 13 factors satisfied. Now, there's 3 elements. They've compressed those 13 factors into 3 elements, and those 3 elements all have to be met for a contractor for a worker to be classified as a contractor. Otherwise, they will be deemed an employee. So that new law is called AB5, and it was passed, I think it was in October of this year. It goes into effect January 1st, 2020. The other thing, some mistakes that people make, they might get an audit notice from the government, maybe the EDD or the IRS, and they say, well, let me try to see if I can fix it on my own. That has a couple problems. And look, I'm a current business owner, but when I was not in law and I ran a company, and we had a very large payroll, and we were looking always to streamline our expenses so we could, squeeze more net income out. Yeah, I was, in a sense, sometimes reluctant to hire an attorney. Do I really need an attorney? I would say this is the one area, taxes, that you definitely want to have an attorney, a qualified tax attorney, because once you give that information over to the government, you can't unwind it and say, well, you know what, I changed my mind. Let me have that piece of information back, or that piece of information I gave you, I realize now that it probably doesn't really help me, or it's not exactly it doesn't capture the transaction. So why don't we just disregard it? And you can't. And so the government auditor's obligation is to consider that as part of the audit. Other mistakes that are made, when you meet with a CPA or a tax preparer, you're going to divulge a lot of information. Well, that information is not protected by any type of privilege. So if there's something that is done significantly wrong, the government could summon your tax preparer, your CPA, and say, hey, provide all the documents that you relied upon to prepare the tax return. Give us all the discussion, a summary of the discussion. They can ask them a bunch of questions. What did Mr. Smith tell you when they were filing your return? Did he have accurate records, or did they seem like they were not consistent? And that's the type of information you really don't want to have the government know. You do have constitutional protection. So if you have a business that has some some challenges, maybe, for instance, this is kind of an extreme example, but the marijuana industry, the growers and the distributors and the sellers, in California, it's legalized, but in the federal side, it's still not legal. I believe it's a type 2 substance. So, if there's something that may not comply with federal law, and now, you're getting an audit, the CPA is going to be asked a bunch of questions. Well, those are some things maybe you want to hire an attorney to give advice, a tax attorney to give advice in conjunction with the CPA, so that you make sure you have the attorney-client privilege. So there's no attorney-client privilege for the preparation of tax returns, but there is for a legal advice and maybe about the tax consequences or the legalities of doing something. That there is. A couple other things. We see this frequently. People sometimes don't report all of their income, and the IRS typically will get a 1099 for certain types of income that you receive. Maybe your business is paid by another company and you're not a corporation, you're an LLC. And here this actually gets back to your earlier question. If you're a corporation, the payer, the person who's paying you, your client, doesn't have to give you a 1099 if you're a corporation. The same does not apply to LLC. So if you're an LLC, your clients who pay you more than $600 for services, they do have to give you a 1099. So sometimes companies forget to report all of their income. And the IRS simply matches all of your 1099s to your tax return, whether it's business or personal. You might have taken a distribution from an IRA. And that's a very typical thing that people sometimes forget about a year later when they file their returns. I'm like, oh, yeah, I did get $100,000 out of my IRA. And they disregarded that notice at the end of the year or the next beginning of that following year, confirming that distribution. And they don't give it to their tax preparer. And there's a penalty involved in not reporting the income and a whole bunch of other stuff. So that seems to be a very common thing more recently. The other thing really, here's one other misconception. If you are either, sometimes companies have a financial hardship and can't pay payroll tax. In those certain circumstances, if there's a payroll tax balance that accrues and it goes on long enough, the government, particularly the IRS or the EDD, will come and assess the tax. They're going to then start collection efforts, and they will interview officers of the company. In fact, they'll interview anybody who they think is a responsible party or responsible person. That's anybody who has the authority to go pay vendor A and not the IRS. So if we sometimes see this with embezzlement. There'll be an accountant or a bookkeeper or somebody that embezzles money from the company. Now the company doesn't have enough money to pay payroll taxes, and this goes on long enough because the problem was hidden by the bookkeeper or the CFO. And now they go after the owner because the owner's a signer in the bank account, and they have the authority to, to pay the IRS, but chose not to. In this case, they really didn't choose. They just maybe were negligent and didn't keep up to date with all the books and records and find out exactly what's being paid and not being paid. So the IRS could make those individuals personally liable for the corporate payroll tax. In fact, it's the part that's withheld from the paychecks of the employees. It's held in trust for the government. And when it's not turned over to the government, when the government comes back and says, okay, whoever's responsible in this company, and it could be more than one person, you're all personally liable. So those are kind of some of the things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really great to know. And there's some similarities and differences with immigration law. So with immigration law, everything is attorney-client privilege that the client tells you. And some similarities is that whatever you provide to the government, once the government has it, they have it. So there's that overlap there with that concept with tax law as well. But that's really good information. And I want to thank you so much, John, for being generous with your time and joining us on this podcast. How do people get in touch with you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, thanks. You can come to our website. It's www.caltaxadvisor.com. That's CalTaxAdvisor.com. They can also reach us at 858-450-1040. And we're happy to help people with questions they have and any audits they have. We do civil as well as criminal. But anything that's mentioned to us is absolutely strictly held as attorney-client privilege, and we're happy to assist people.
Thank you. And if you have any questions, listeners, about immigration law, you can reach us at 916-613-3553. And you can also check us out at ranchodlaw.com, and we will talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click to subscribe, check us out on the web, and we will see you next time.